As a kid, I was obsessed with electronics in my basement laboratory. My happiness was a function of acrid solder smoke, blinking lights, clacking relays, and the sweet, mysterious crackle of shortwave radio. By the time I was 12, I was a ham radio operator known as WN4KSW, a skinny, burr-headed prisoner of school. I was theoretically a smart little bugger, according to test scores, yet I kept hearing that I had attitude problems and wasn't working up to my potential. With the exception of science fairs, my academic performance was apparently disappointing. Oh well, I didn't care. I had a secret life. School received the minimum attention required, which wasn't much. In the meantime, I amused myself with microphones in the ductwork and a parasitic phone line routed through an old Black Crackle 19-inch equipment rack. The lab was packed with gizmological treasures that I remember with deep fondness. Military surplus ham radios, including an ARC-V, Morse code translator, stereo amp. I was a lonely little nerd, and this was my happy place. Down in the musty basement, around the corner from my dad's well-equipped workshop. When neighborhood bullies soaked my books on the way home from school one day, I ran home and attached a battery-powered 14,000-volt power supply to the brass nozzles of a pair of squirt guns mounted side by side on a T-shaped piece of plywood, with salt water as conductive ammo. There was a big lever to depress both triggers, and as long as both streams hit someone before generating into droplets, the circuit was closed. I was shaking in my boots during the beta test, but it shifted the balance of power. A pattern was forming, solving life problems with a geek cheat code. Electronics was always in my back pocket, ready to tap when outgunned, outclassed, in trouble, or just needing an edge. All this was empowering, but most seductive of all was radio, for it connected me to the outside. Other people, other tongues, sideband squawks, and cultural attitudes unlike the Huntley-Brinkley report that invariably accompanied dinner. I spent years gazing through this electronic window and building my tools. Like the railroad tracks that passed near my house, radio became symbolic of escape and movement. My physical adventures were confined to rural bike hikes and summer camp, but in my head I could cruise the universe with a skyhook and a collection of instruments ablaze with Nixies. When I was a senior, I finally made it to the International Science Fair, the Holy Grail, with a homemade speech synthesizer. Having hit dead ends after 3 years of tank circuits and tape loops, I built a working acoustic model of the vocal tract based on X-rays of my own head. It even had a voice change problem. I arrived at engineering school as a 16-year-old with Ivy League fantasies, then stuck out my thumb on the interstate only 6 months later. I hitched to Colorado and back, lied about my age to spend the summer of '70 as a deckhand on river barges, briefly punched a clock, got a gig installing telephone switching systems on Army bases, then believed a recruiter and found myself in Air Force Basic with a case of mono. Wait, what? I spent a few months in a Mississippi tech school, then drove to Idaho to fix F-111 avionics. But my real focus was in a dorm room lab packed with comm gear, test equipment, laser with optical bench, and a cat named Bolivar. Shortwave slurping signals from all over the world, hikes in the desert, a wall of books. All this led inevitably to headbutting with authority. So with a bit of drama, I hit reset, packed a rental truckload of gizmology around my 59 Bug-Eye Sprite, and I discovered the booming electronics surplus market. I set up a lab in my poolside hotel room and started teaching myself logic design, memory architectures, interfacing. And as this made more and more sense, I grew obsessed with the idea of building my own computer. The boundless energy of youth. I was 21, and the project eclipsed everything else. Personal computers didn't yet exist in early 1974, so this was virgin territory. On Halloween, after a blur of Waffle House-fueled all-nighters, the wire-wrapped machine flickered to life. In some primitive male response to those first blinkies, I started my beard that day. It had a feature set that would have made me rich had I any business sense at all. But working alone in Kentucky isolated me from the personal computer gold rush that was beginning. This photo shows my apartment in early 1975. I used paper tape for file and program storage, then cobbled an audio cassette interface from a Bell modem. In 1976, word got out that some hippie was designing with microprocessors right there in Louisville, and before long I was building custom industrial control systems for Corning, Seagram's, Honeywell, and other clients. When that became too much for an apartment, I moved to the local industrial park, hired a couple of employees, and incorporated. I had one simple rule. Every project had to spawn at least one magazine article, and there was no shortage of those. I was writing for Byte, Kilobaud, Creative Computing, Machine Design, and more. In retrospect, this was one of those life epochs that could have lasted decades, and when I moved it all into a sprawling 13-room Victorian house, it indeed seemed as if I had settled down. But I should have known better. I burned bridges and trucked all the machinery to Ohio, where I bought a 3-bedroom ranch in suburbia. But within a year, I quit the job and was suddenly a freelancer with a mortgage. For context, this was a time of hardwired phones with expensive long-distance charges, library research, subscriptions to dozens of magazines, and flying to conferences to stay current. But the meaning of information was starting to shift, with bibliographic searching at $1 a minute and hints of online community. The world was about to change completely, and the acoustic coupler was my initial connection to the primitive online services. Meanwhile, I wrote an engineering textbook followed by a slim business volume about microsystem management, covered trade shows and conferences, started an information brokerage firm, cranked out articles, and even had relationships. But at the age of 30, I started fantasizing about a radical life inversion. If my product was words, and words have no mass, then why would it matter where my body was? With the advent of portable computers and online networks, shouldn't it be possible to travel full-time and run a business while mobile?